Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this month's Cyber Showcase, a Cybersecurity Awareness Month prep session. A lot of words there, but something I'm very excited about for this month. As always, I'm your host, Brett Rock, a business development and product specialist here with SBS Cybersecurity. I'm also being joined by two of my teammates who are brand new to the Cyber Showcase. Very excited to have them on board with me here today. We have Mark Charla, who's an information security consultant with the team, and Lindsay Hull, who just came on board probably a handful of months ago now as our content strategist. I'm really excited to have Lindsay here to talk about some of the great things that we're putting out from a content perspective that might be able to help you guys out in October as well. But Mark, why don't I give you the floor here for a minute to just introduce yourself, and then Lindsay, it'll be your turn, and then we'll jump into things.
Yep, as Brett said, I'm Mark Charlie, information security consultant. Prior to that, I was with SBS as an IT auditor. Before that, I was working at a small financial institution, which a lot of people are probably aware of. You wear many hats. I was the IT officer, physical security officer, secretary of the board at a small bank. Prior to that, I provided IT services for working with an MSP that did specifically worked with banks. So it's kind of my background.
Great. Well, we're very excited to have you here and to have this conversation. Lindsay, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, hello. Happy to be here. I'm Lindsay Hull. I'm the content strategist at SBS, and really excited to talk to you all today about some great content we have that's really going to be helpful as we go into October, and you won't have to start from scratch. We have a lot of great resources to help you share with your teams and with your customers.
Absolutely. And incidentally, we do have a lot of those linked to on the slide deck here. So toward the end, if you want to get a copy of the deck, feel free to reach out to me. I'll have my contact information up here, Lindsay's contact information as well. And certainly, if you want a copy of the deck, we can do that. Just a few caveats as usual at the top here. If you do have questions, please go ahead and use the appropriate box there, the question and answer box. If we can get to those at the end, we have some time, I'll make sure I cover them. Alternatively, if we don't get to them for some reason, I'll make sure we get back to you one way or the other. And as always, feel free to use the chat to talk back and forth, share best practices, things like that as well. I think this is a good opportunity for you guys to talk about some of the best practices you have, in addition to some of the things we're going to talk about today. So in terms of the agenda, first of all, on the left-hand side there, as usual, we've got our contact information as well as some very fancy photos of the three of us. We're working on introductions as we speak. We're going to talk a little bit about what's here from SBS, what's coming. I've got a couple of things I want to hit on there from a content perspective. And then Mark and I are going to jump into a conversation about getting ready for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. The idea with this being done in September, obviously October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Our goal with this session is really to talk to you about why it's important to be educating your customers, why October is a great time to do it, or at least get started. We'll talk about some of the threats and things that you might want to cover when you're having those conversations. Great ways to consider when you are talking about how we're going to cover these things. And then, as I mentioned toward the end, Lindsay's going to cover some of the blog posts and different solutions we might have to help. We'll do some takeaways, and if we have some time, some Q&A. So again, really excited about this session, and feel free to ask questions as we're moving through it. For those of you who are not familiar with us, although I imagine most of you are, SBS Cybersecurity, we've been in the business for over 20 years now, all kinds of different credentials there that I'm sure you're familiar with. And the big one at the bottom there, we're always very proud of that we were ranked #1 for cybersecurity consulting by G2 by our customers last year. What's here from SBS? If you're anything like me, you're probably tired of hearing about NIST and CRI profile, but I feel compelled to talk to you about it one last time here. We did launch those two modules. So as I'm sure you're all familiar with, the FFIEC CAT did sunset as of August 31st. We have two different options to help out in terms of replacement. The NIST CSF module of track, we have both a free and a premium version of that. You're more than welcome to take a look at. And then we did launch our newest module about 6 weeks ago, maybe 7 weeks ago now, the CRI profile. So two great options for you to potentially replace the CAT as you're looking to do that. A couple of things that are coming up from an educational perspective. We do have our track user group meeting next week. Very excited about this one because we will be introducing and actually demoing for the first time our newest module that's slated to come out at the end of the month, our employee access review module of Track. So if that's a concern for you, how you're conducting employee or user access reviews, we will have a module that can help with that. And we're going to cover that during the Track user group. Encourage you, if you are a Track user, to get involved in that. Later this month, on September 17th, we also have Dylan Kretzfeld on our team covering incident response. He's going to cover things like the current cybersecurity landscape, incident response basics and regulatory guidance, threat identification and assessments, all kinds of great things. Dylan's awesome. He'll be covering that. Nick Podrodsky, as you guys all know, covers our Hacker Hour. He'll be talking about ransomware defense and resilience later this month on September 24th. And then finally, Cody Delzer on our team, another SBS Institute webinar. This one's in October, though. Cody's going to talk about AI security and privacy for financial institutions, including looking at ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, DeepSeek, everything you can possibly think of, all the different risks that are out there, real world use cases, things like that. So encourage you, if you're getting into AI or thinking about it or wanting to see use cases, Cody's going to cover that in October as well. So with that said, let's jump into our topic for today, cybersecurity awareness and kind of getting you prepared for it. We're obviously going to cover a lot of different threats that you might want to talk about or think about when you're talking to your customers. We are going to get into everybody's favorite topic, AI, and how that's impacting different things and different types of threats, and how that might facilitate some of these different cyber crimes or cyber threats that are out there. And again, as I mentioned, some of the different ways you might want to cover it, stuff like that. But I think this is as good a place to start as any, Mark. So let me start with you, as having been at a financial institution previously and now working with our customers from a consultant perspective. You know, why is October? Why is the idea of a Cybersecurity Awareness Month? Why is that a really good opportunity for us as financial institutions to kind of really jump into this with both feet and maybe start working with our customers a little bit more closely?
Yeah, well, obviously cybersecurity, it touches everybody these days. And everybody's got a smartphone, everybody uses a computer. But I think the Cybersecurity Month itself, I think, has gotten a lot of traction. I think everybody's aware of it now. You can't watch football in October without seeing a CDW or a Cisco or somebody got a Cybersecurity Month advertisement up. So I think it's in the conscience of the country. So I think it's perfect time while they're thinking of it, push it out to our customers.
Yeah, and certainly we would encourage people to be educated year round. This isn't something where we're saying just do it once and then you're covered.
Yeah.
But it is a good opportunity. It is on top of mind. I feel like I totally agree with you. I think the team there that rolls out the Cybersecurity Awareness Month and the different tenets that they include each year, and Lindsay's going to cover a little bit of the theme for this year later on as well. But it does put it front of mind, as I mentioned, and I think that's a great opportunity if you're not doing something currently, or even if you are. This is a really good time to really ramp that up and kind of blow it out. But having been at a financial institution in the past, are there any big misconceptions you still think linger out there with customers in terms of cybersecurity and kind of, whether it's individual or commercial customers?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is still not me. It's not, I'm too small, or, I don't have information that anybody wants, so I'm not going to get attacked. Or if I do, I'm not really going to lose anything. So, to me, that's one of the biggest misconceptions is you do have information that people want, and it is going to cost you if you lose it. So, but I would see that constantly, especially at a smaller institution, is we're too small. There, we're small potatoes. Nobody's going to bother us. Then everybody's a potential victim. So you can't have that mindset.
Yeah, and we're going to jump into all kinds of statistics here. I apologize in advance. This time of the year, statistics, I think, tell a really good story about the different threats that are out there. But I think that, to just piggyback on what you said there, everybody's a potential target. It doesn't matter who you are. The rate at which these scams are coming out and being perpetrated, and just how fast you can turn around phishing emails and scans and things like that. I totally agree with you. That would have been my number one answer as well. The idea that we're not a target it is a really dangerous mindset to have, for sure. So
absolutely.
Let's talk about just quickly, why, from your perspective, why does it matter if I'm a financial institution? What does it matter if my customers are educated? Why is that important to me?
Well, financial institutions are always at risk, both financially and reputationally, because there's kind of a, oh, the bank's going to cover it mentality. So anytime there's a financial loss, it's kind of on a burden of the financial institution to prove it's not them. They have to, do research, make sure it's not their fault in any manner, because if it is, it's their responsibility to cover it. So even if it's not your fault, you're still going to have to do, it's still going to cost you some resources to investigate that to make sure it's not you. And you're always at a reputational risk. So, we live in the social media age. The odds are if a company gets compromised, you're going to find out who their bank was, right? And so even if you had absolutely nothing to do with it, you have the potential of, oh, maybe I don't want to bank with them because their customers are getting compromised. So it's always important. It's always the potential is always there to come back on you as a financial institution.
Yeah. Or really any company, right? I mean, I always go back to the Target breach, right? Everybody knows it as the Target breach, but if you really dug into that, really even started to read by the time you got to the 4th or 5th paragraph of the news story about it, it wasn't Target that got breached, right? It was an HVAC system company that just happened to plug into the Target network, and then the bad guy had access to everything, right? So it is that, it might not even be your fault, but it is that reputational risk that's out there. And unfortunately, the blame falls where it falls sometimes.
Yep.
So let's jump into some of those statistics. I think why is important because it is a real threat, right? So last year, U.S. consumers lost more than $12.5 billion to fraud. In 2024, that was a 25% increase. Those numbers, by the way, seem drastically underreported. And that seems to be the thread throughout all the research I did anyway, where the estimate is closer to anywhere between 150 to 200 million. And even the official numbers, right? The FBI has this number closer to 16.5 billion. So, Mark, is there any reason in your mind that these numbers can be so drastically? I mean, 12.5 billion is not anything to scoff at. That's a big loss anyway. But anything in your mind that drives that underreporting of the financial crime to consumers?
Well, I think the big number there is probably there's a lot that are not regulated. So financial institutions, we know if there's an incident, we have to report to the primary regulator within 36 hours. There's certain notification rules for customers. If you're a publicly traded company, you've got certain SEC rules you have to follow. But if you're not regulated and you're not publicly traded, there isn't a whole lot that requires you to do so. And I think there's a couple things there. There's one, the embarrassment. They don't want to admit that they've had an incident. And then to go along with that, they don't want the reputational risk of, hey, we're the company that got, lost customer information. Do you still want to, do business with us? And then there's probably a little bit of education where if you're, we know we have to call the FDIC or the OCC or Federal Reserve. They may not even know how to report it. But I think largely it's just they don't want to because they don't want to admit that it happened.
Right.
And they don't have to.
Right. So a lot of losses, and certainly it seems like that number, even though it did increase, probably is dramatically lower than the reality of it. Yep. This one's interesting. Obviously, for every dollar of fraud loss that we talked about, the U.S. financial service industry loses $5.75. So even if we're looking at that $12.5 billion number and we're thinking to ourselves, okay, that seems super low. If you're a financial institution, obviously these losses are considerably more significant. And I assume, Mark, that's probably in a lot of ways because of the some of those hidden costs that we talk about, the amount of resources you have to put into researching this, maybe any sort of potential to try to get it back, or the reputational losses that just seems like those can really stack up. It's the multiplier effect, right? If it was bad for the consumer, it's probably upwards of 5 times as bad for a financial institution. So again, this is just a very real threat we have to be considering, because a cyber attack occurs every 39 seconds. Now, this is a fairly old statistic. I tried to find an updated number, but I always like to point out, and I think to try to put this in context, a cyber attack is occurring every 39 seconds, probably at minimum at this point. The American Dental Association recommends that you spend 2 minutes brushing your teeth every morning. So we're talking upwards of 3 or 4 different cyber attacks occurring as you're brushing your teeth in the morning. Every minute, the statistics say about 33,000 phishing emails go out the door, 1.5 million records are exposed in data breaches, and about $17,700 lost to ransomware. So again, these are real numbers. This isn't anything to look at and say, well, who knows? It can't be that bad, right? It actually really truly is that bad. And I think as we start to talk about some of the effects that AI have, it's probably only going to amplify that. But Mark, I'll go back to you on this one. Those numbers to me are pretty terrifying and hard to grasp. Are there anything that stands out to you about kind of just the sheer volume of threats that are out there?
Yeah, no, kind of reiterate and reoccurring theme here. I think part of that is largely due to AI, because it has become increasingly simple. You need little to no knowledge to do an attack now with AI. And then it's a scale thing. You can write a script and tell AI, go do this, and it pushes it out on a much larger scale. And I think that's just, those two factors are just amplifying this and making it worse and worse.
So I imagine kind of as a follow-up question to that, the likelihood of this getting any better in the future is probably pretty small, right?
I'm not entirely sure of that. And, I'm sometimes accused of being a closet optimist, but
Gotcha.
It's kind of like if you look back, in the early 2000s, 2010s, around there, viruses were a huge problem, right? And today that's not as big a problem. The reason for that is because AV used signatures, right? It said, I identify this is what this virus looks like, so we'll block this, and then they would modify it a little bit. Okay, now it's this signature, so we'll block this. And then the AV companies eventually got to the point where they're like, this is just not working. We need to change our strategy. So they changed it to a behavior based, where it says, I know this application should do A. If it does B, something's wrong. I may not know what it is. It may be okay, but I don't recognize it. Therefore, I'm going to block it, which took that from this big a problem to this bigger problem, right? I think we're going to see, again, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I'm going to see the double-edged sword of AI here, where, yeah, AI has made it easier, but AI is also going to do a better job of detecting it. Microsoft is integrating Copilot into Defender as an example in Microsoft 365. So they're using AI to quickly identify these attacks and respond without any human intervention. So in some aspects, they're doing a better job than they were 2 years ago because of AI. And, we're never going to, it's always a catch-up game. The bad guys are always going to be ahead. But again, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I do think it's going to get a little better at some point. It may not happen by the end of the year, but at some point, I do think AI is going to get to the point where it's going to need more human intervention to trick itself, if you will.
Well, we'll put you down as the glass half full, and myself as a bit of a glass half empty guy. But then again, I'm hosting a webinar here, and the content's a little better when it's negative, I guess, right? But no, I think that's a great point, and I think we'll definitely talk a little bit more about how AI can be used to defend against attacks here in the future as well. 85% of all ransomware attacks are happening on small businesses. 60% of all small businesses that incur a cyber attack generally go out of business. So obviously that's a big threat. We're going to definitely talk more about these types of threats, ransomware, things like that. But Mark, again, I'll turn it back over to you. How do you think these successful attacks on a small business kind of really impact? What's the biggest impact on a financial institution? So if I'm working with a small business and I'm banking them, or they come to my credit union, if they have an attack, how does that impact us? Is it more of a financial impact? Is it, again, reputational, kind of a mix of both?
Yeah, I would say it's a risk of both, but I think probably the biggest risk to banks from a customer being compromised is going to be corporate account takeover, business email compromise with ACH and wire fraud, which typically is going to be start off with a phishing email or some sort of social engineering where they can intercept that, and maybe you've got callback procedures, so they get into a conversation and say, hey, we've changed who you need to call this new number, and then that's kind of how the whole wire fraud thing starts. But I think that's probably the biggest risk to the banks of their customers being compromised.
Yeah. So you've already undermined my next slide a little bit, but that's okay. Because AI threats are already here and will likely get worse. Maybe I'll rephrase that as get a little bit more dangerous. So there was a Fortinet study that revealed a 16.7% increase in automated scanning. About 36,000 scans per second have been recorded globally in the past couple of years. And so obviously, those are pretty significant numbers, but I think your point is well taken that to some degree, maybe we do get to fight fire with fire in the near future when it comes to AI. And while those threats do get a little bit more dangerous and maybe a little bit easier to pull off, the flip side of it is we're just a little bit better prepared to take them on. I think that's a really very, very fair point there. So, and again, we'll get into more of the AI impact on these threats.
But to agree with you, I do think it'll get worse before it gets better.
Oh, well, there we go.
I was thinking a little more long-term because it is, and I know I sent you something that I think you're going to bring up later that shows how little knowledge is actually needed to do some of these things. So, and that's kind of the scary part, is anybody can do it. Yep.
So on the flip side, the threats are real and growing and potentially getting more dangerous. But as financial institutions, you guys have the opportunity here to be the trusted advisor. So we've got the next couple of slides here just dealing with how impactful you as an advisor can be. And on this slide here, we've got 84% of people responding in the survey said that a bank has the responsibility to provide customers with resources on staying safe online and in online scams. And I think if any research you look at, it really does show that where are people turning to? Which of the companies that they give their information to pretty routinely are they most confident will protect their data and have the information they need to protect themselves? And it's almost always their financial institution. So I think that's a really key component here. As we head into October, they're probably going to be looking to our audience here today to support them and make sure that they have the information they need to stay safe. How important is it to you that your financial institution offers training about staying safe online and online scams to customers who want it? About 85% there, a little bit over that, say it's either very important or important. So again, hitting home that they're looking to you for this information. If your bank offered training about staying safe online and online scams, would you use it? Again, we're talking at least 47% there, maybe a little bit higher with the I'm not sure's. And then if a bank offered training about staying safe online and online scams for children, would it impact your choice of a provider? And over half of the respondents here said that yes, it would make them more likely to sign up or switch their banking provider. So again, I think this just goes a long way in saying that you can be the voice here. Your customers are looking to you for this information. They're looking for somebody to help them out. And I think these last slides in the stats that we took a look at here really bear that out. And Mark, I'll turn it back over to you again here. Having been at a financial institution, I imagine your experience as even a smaller institution has been pretty similar there.
Yeah, and I would say one of the big things is with training is kind of the muscle memory. The more we can get that in front of the customers or even internally, the better. I look back to when I was at the bank and we implemented no before, right? And the first simulated phishing attack, I think 60% of the people clicked on it. And then we did campaigns, monthly campaigns, were randomly throughout the month and would send you an email. And that went down to, next to nothing. One or two, maybe a month would click on it. And it was just that constant muscle memory. And they were always, sending me emails. Hey, is this okay? Is that okay? And, I think the more we can get in front of the customer, the more they see it, I think the better, because like you said earlier, once a year doesn't really stick, and it needs to be an ongoing thing.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to hear something once and you think, oh man, that's important. I'm going to be really good about this. And 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, you're still kind of sticking to it. But you get a month out from hearing something, and just like anything else, you can kind of see it start to fade a little bit. So I think that's a really key component here as well. This is a good time to really ramp up your efforts. October being Cybersecurity Awareness Month again, but certainly it shouldn't be the one-off. We've done it. We can kind of forget about it again for the rest of the year, kind of thing. So let's jump into some of the threats that we need to talk about. I want to start with the phishing, which is kind of the biggest one. Everybody's familiar with this. About 3.4 billion phishing emails are sent daily. That would basically be the rough equivalent of every man, woman, and child in the state of California sending 103 emails every day. So these are going out pretty regularly, obviously. And as Mark, you highlighted earlier on, that's kind of even ramping up faster thanks to some of the AI advancements. But obviously, after all this time, and again, it's probably been a handful of years now where phishing has really been in the mainstream in terms of a threat. But why do you think, Mark, that phishing is still thought of as the number one threat after all these years? Why is it still so effective as an option for the bad guys here?
Well, it still works. That's the big thing, right? The human elements, always the weakest link of the chain. They really prey on emotion and urgency. If they can find a way to, strike a nerve, they're going to get you to respond. I think one of the big things along with AIs that probably help this increase is a lot better. They're just the emails themselves, or even phone, or we have all kinds of phishing, smishing, the whole 9 yards. But phishing in particular with the emails, they're so much better. They're not, when they first started it, it was the Nigerian prince and the wording was terrible and you could spot it in 2 seconds. Now you've got to actually take the time to look at it. Wait a minute, is this right? Is it, say, Microsoft.org instead of Microsoft.com? I think it's just better, and I think AI has probably helped that quite a bit. But it still works. I mean, that's the real answer, because of the human element, and people are still going to fall for it. And it's easy. Criminals criminals are like water. They take the path of least resistance. It's hard to hack a system. It's easy to send a phishing email.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always kind of go back to, to your point, Mark, when this was first kind of really ramping up, the Prince of Nigeria needs your social security number and things like that. It was pretty easy to look at that and say, wow, man, you must be really dumb if you fall for that, right?
Yeah.
But the emails that we do get now, and we use Know Before internally, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this webinar here today are using some sort of phishing training and development and testing tool. I'll be completely honest with you. Just probably a month ago, I was waiting on an agenda for a retreat that we were going to have from my boss. Just so happened to be timed perfectly. That was the simulated phishing test for that week. I got it, didn't even think twice, clicked on it, and failed my test. Luckily, that's only happened twice in my entire time here. But again, it doesn't take a lot to miss some of this stuff, right? I mean, to your point, They look really good. The content, especially if you're talking about spear phishing attempts where people are doing real research on this, obviously it can be really dangerous. And all it takes is being absent-minded for a second, right?
Yep.
Lindsay's going to cover this a little bit later on when we get to the content. We do have a blog post on what we call the golden rule for email, which is essentially treat every email like a phishing email. Is that kind of the mindset you subscribe to, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, sometimes, especially if somebody is going to attack you with a spear phishing attack, I mean, it's going to be good, right? You've really got to pay attention, hover over the link and really pay attention to the email address that it's coming from and those kind of things. So yeah, they're pretty good.
Do you see or recommend, obviously, again, a lot of KnowBe4 users out there, a lot of other phishing testing, training, and development companies that do it. I don't want to make it sound like KnowBe4 is the only one, but are you starting to see that get rolled out, not just at like a financial institution level, but starting to see some individual companies start to dig into that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely become more popular. I think if there was anything I would recommend that I've seen probably more so when I was in auditing is frequency. A lot of people are, maybe twice a year, maybe quarterly. That's probably not enough. You probably got to be doing it, at least monthly. I've seen people doing it weekly, but it's definitely something that people are aware of and they're doing more. But
well, the only real way to get better at anything is to kind of practice it. And I think having those tests where
yep.
you can click on something and fail and get some point of failure training and things like that when the bullets, when it's not really dangerous, certainly I think can be very helpful. So obviously there's other types of social engineering that are out there. Whoop, let me go back a bit here. You kind of highlighted the biggest one, Mark, or the one that I think we recognize as kind of the most dangerous out there. Is that business email compromise. Do you want to explain the difference between that and maybe some of the other phishing attempts that are out there and kind of why that's you already did a pretty good job with it, but why that's so dangerous?
Yeah, so if they can compromise, in particular, let's say a CFO, if they could compromise that CFO's email account, what they could do is they could get in there and start sending emails, true legitimate emails from that account, making requests. And, even if you're being vigilant, it's going to be coming from that person, right? And which makes it really dangerous is because it's going to get through any filtering, any, endpoint scanning, that sort of stuff. So that is where typically you're going to find, your ACH and wire fraud type stuff, right? They're going to compromise, you've got the manufacturer that's does an ACH file every week. They're going to compromise that email and then change some information. They're going to do, hey, we're going to verify it. Well, you've already changed the phone number because you've legitimately used that account to change the phone number. And it becomes very difficult to detect that. So that's one of probably I don't know if it's the most dangerous, but it's right up there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about how AI does get involved here. So obviously I've got one stat here that deepfake related losses are projected to get to $40 billion by 2027. So that obviously would dwarf some of the losses that we talked about a little bit earlier on. But, let's start with what, we talked a little bit about it already, but why is social engineering in particular kind of such maybe a hotbed for what AI can do, at least potentially from a negative perspective?
Yeah, with the deepfake in particular gets a little scary is, one of the things is can it beat biometrics, right? So if you're using biometrics, facial scans, cadence of how you speak, the tone of your voice, if it can start to mimic that, you can now bypass MFA if that's what you're using for MFA. The other part of that is, it's one thing to get an email from me to say, wire $10,000. It's another thing to get a video of me. You're looking at my face telling you, hey, this is urgent. I need you to wire $10,000. And it looks and sounds just like me, and you can't tell the difference. It makes it a whole lot easier to trick individuals. And one technology that's probably the scariest of all is the live deep fakes, where you can have an actual conversation and it'll show me and sound like me, but somebody else is actually speaking and doing the responses. That one's, from the last I heard, is not quite as good as it could be, because things like if you turn sideways, it doesn't match your face correctly and that sort of stuff. But yeah, deep fakes are the potential. Again, the human link is the human is the weakest link. So you see it, you don't even think twice about it. Oh yeah, that's obviously him, right? But yeah, it's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, and we're already starting to see losses from, people getting a phone call from, it's a grandparent getting a phone call from their grandkid, telling them they're in trouble or something like that, right? And it sounds like them, and sometimes that's hard to parse the difference. You get freaked out, you start panicking, and obviously it's easier to make bad decisions at that point. So I think not just the video side of things, but just even the audio side, correct?
Yeah, and there's they'll have calls where if there's a certain number of words that if you say, they can pretty much mimic your voice perfectly. So they'll ask you some questions, hey, do you bank at such and such a bank? No, what are you talking about? We have you, and then you go through a certain set. Oh, sorry, our misunderstanding. We apologize. We'll take you off our call list, whatever. And then you don't think anything of it. They've just taken your voice, and now, like you said, a big one is, Grandma, I'm in jail. Can you wire me, $10,000 or whatever to get out of here? But yeah, that's another big one.
Do you think that we're seeing more attacks because of AI, or is it just kind of speeding up those older attacks, or is it kind of a hybrid of both there?
Probably a hybrid. I think the biggest thing is the ease, right? Like I said, if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, we would have been talking about the dark web, right? If you wanted to have an attack, without knowledge, you would have to go to the dark web and you would pay somebody and they'd create it for you. And you don't even need to do that anymore. You go out to AI and say, create me an attack. Here's who I want, and it'll do it for you. And you don't have any real knowledge need to do it. Pretty much anybody can do it.
So if you had one piece of kind of urgent advice to give anybody on that you might talk to from a consulting perspective about AI and how to protect yourself, how to protect customers, things like that, what would be the biggest piece of advice at this point that we can give?
I would think the number one thing is, making sure it's part of your risk assessment, getting it in there. Even a year ago, when talking to people about AI, they said, "Oh, we're just not going to use AI." You have to realize there's no such thing as we're not going to use AI, right? It's everywhere. It's in the software that you've purchased. You've got this attackers using it. So I think the biggest thing is you just need to start talking about it. You need to understand, what are the risks, and then what can we do? What education do we need to do? What other, security products do we need to put in place? But I think the biggest thing is just to start talking about it. And like I said, a year ago, I think people really had their heads in the sand saying, we just don't want to deal with AI, but it's here. We can't avoid it. We need to start talking about it and making sure it's part of the risk assessment, and we understand, what are the potential risks of it.
So Mark was kind enough to demo this up for me. I'm going to see if I can get it to work here. Let's see how this works.
Is unique. So why would you work with a cybersecurity company with a one-size-fits-all approach? To face today's cybersecurity challenges, you need a true partner, one ready to customize their approach to fit your unique needs.
So, Mark, how long did that take you to create? How hard was this to do?
Minute and a half, 2 minutes, maybe. Not at all. I went out to our marketing website, pulled down your headshot, uploaded it, grabbed a little, blurb off our website and said, this is what I want you to say. And there it goes. Now, that was a freebie version. that I used, which you can see the watermark there, HeyGen. If you pay for, the free version, I can do, I think it was a 10-second or something like that. Free version, you can do minutes long. I could take one of these, webinars we're doing, put you in there, and then it'll start to mimic your voice, and your mannerisms and everything, depending on, I don't know if hygienic specifically does that, but there are products that'll do that. It'll take your video and start to mimic, like, do I do this motion? It'll do that motion, right? And it'll mimic your voice as well. And you don't need any knowledge. You just say, here's what I want, and here's what I want it to say.
So again, I think in this, I could tell the difference, obviously, but I do think that it's getting close. And to your point, I think this was a free thing that you just signed up for and did in a minute and a half. I think, obviously people are putting more effort into it on the other side of the house here. So I think it goes to how scary and how easy this stuff can be, for sure. So thought that was both terrifying and fascinating. So let's talk, and I apologize that we are running a little long. I've been gotten really excited about the AI stuff, but let's go through some of the other threats that are out there that are pretty common. Obviously, password hygiene is a big one. This actually is going to come into play when Lindsay covers the 4 different kind of core pieces of this month's cybersecurity awareness, this year's cybersecurity awareness month thing. The most common passwords in 2024 continue to include all those things you see on the screen here. And then we've got one of my favorite movies here, even 30 years ago now, Spaceballs making fun of the fact that people have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as a combination. Mark, I guess maybe I'll just ask you a rhetorical question here. How is it that people are still using these passwords? And then maybe what is if you had to give customers a password hygiene checklist, what would be on that?
Yeah. To answer the first part, I honestly don't know, because it's you got so many, I can't think of a site that I go to or whatever that there isn't some sort of complexity requirement that you can't put these passwords in. So I really don't know where those are being used. But I'm going to go ahead and throw out my disclaimer here. This is the opinion of Mark and does not represent SBS or any of its other employees or whatever. Because I hate to say this, but in my 25 plus years of IT, I don't think there's been anything more debated than passwords. So I'm going to give you what my personal opinion is on passwords. And so, did you get that?
Yeah, this one.
Yeah. Yep. There we go. So if we look at Hive does a wonderful job. They put this out every year. It shows you how quickly passwords can be cracked. And you got to take this with a grain of salt a little bit, because this is how much time it would take to go through every possible combination. So what we look at here is, if you look at on the left, you got how many characters, and then across the top, numbers only, lowercase letters, so forth. So if you look at, the gold standard from, until probably 2020 was probably 8 characters, right? So if you look at, and actually I sent you the wrong one.
Sorry.
Now that I look at this, I sent you the wrong one. I apologize for that. There's an updated one that, because it's gotten better. So take that off the screen. That one's no good. So I'll get the updated one.
Sure.
But an 8-character password using full complexity, meaning using all 4 different types, characters, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, punctuation, can now be cracked. Every possible combination can be done in 5 minutes, right?
Okay.
So, that was the big thing, a few years back is, we got to make the passwords complex. We didn't worry about the length so much. We want to make it complex. Okay. So then we bump it up to 10 characters. Now 10-character full complexity can be cracked in about 2 weeks. But then if you bump it up to 12 characters, full complexity, it takes 226 years to go through every combination. So you can see that by that, the character length, there's 3 things that affect how good a password is: the character length, the complexity, how many different types of characters, and the character or the password uniqueness, meaning, or I should say randomness is probably a better word. Are you using dictionary words? So as an example, a 3-character completely random password using 3 different types of characters, if it's 12-character random, it would take 53 years to crack. I picked a password, cybersecurity attack, exclamation point, capital C, cybersecurity attack, cyber attack, excuse me, exclamation, which is also 12 characters. So the random one took 12 years. I used some different tools and they always give you different results. So it's kind of, you never really know for sure, but basically one said it could do it in minutes, one said about 8 hours, one said about a year. So even at the high end, you go from 53 years to a year just by being random, right? So and if you look at, I got to bring because I gave you the wrong one. I got to bring the other one up.
That certainly happens. I assure you.
So if you look at strictly uppercase and lowercase letters only, a 12-character password would take 6 years to crack. So, we think, 10-character complex password can be done in 2 weeks. 12 characters, simple, 6 years. So the length is much more important than the complexity. Now, again, if you're using dictionary words, it changes that a little bit because I typed out all lowercase letters, or what is it? No, I'm sorry. I've got myself off track there, but the length makes so much of a difference that I did all lowercase letters. The cow jumped over the moon, which is a 23-character password, right? All dictionary words, all lowercase letters, and each utility I ran gave me different numbers, but all of them were hundreds of years to crack. So that's the difference the length makes. So I would say, kind of contrary to what has been told in the past, I don't think complexity is as important as randomness, meaning it's not dictionary words, but even more importantly is the length. So ideally, I think we need to get to at least 12-character passwords.
Sure.
But the tricky part to that is the randomness is hard to enforce. A little bit harder to enforce. You can enforce the complexity. You must use these types of characters, but the randomness is a little bit harder to enforce. And I think that's where password managers really come in handy. And cool. I think
we'll talk about.
I don't know if we're going to talk that in a little bit. Yeah. So
in a little bit as well, but definitely fascinating stuff. And when I send anybody this deck, we'll make sure we get the right picture on here for you. Just a couple other slides here before we start getting into some of how we might want to train our customers. Actually, I guess one more here. 47% of small businesses don't have an incident response plan. Obviously, we talked earlier about 85% of all ransomware attacks are on small businesses. Those are two numbers that are not going in the right direction together. And then about 50% of all small business owners believe that they are not a target, which Mark, as you highlighted earlier on, is pretty patently false. So that's something scary as well. When it comes to training your customers, Mark, is there anything that you've seen in the past, or we're going to talk about some of the traditional options and maybe kind of thinking outside the box a little bit, but anything that you've seen that actually sticks versus just kind of being another reminder email?
Yeah, it's always difficult when you're trying to train customers because they're so inundated with information. You send them an email, it's not going to work. They're just going to delete it. You post it on their website. Odds are they're not going to go out and get it. You need to find unique ways. And I've something I didn't do personally that I tried to do that the board just didn't want to fork over the money for. But as I went into, user groups, I would talk and everybody would say the same thing, that they said lunch and learns are one of the best. You're getting people, you can kind of have a captive audience because you're giving them a lunch, right? But lots of good feedback that I've heard from Lunch and Learns. You get them in there. One thing I think that probably works really well is to try and hit home as best you can. Give real life scenarios where it's either very similar customers or very close by customers, so that they understand that, hey, it could happen to us, right?
Yeah.
Another thing I've done, I was a part of that was not customers, but I think would be really good with customers, is getting the FBI involved. We did one where I think we had like 6 small banks that got together, and an FBI agent from the local office, which is about an hour from where our bank was, came out and talked to us. And that was one of the most impactful trainings I ever had, because, talk about telling you stories. They can tell you some stories, and they are really, I talked to that FBI agent, and I talked to a couple other FBI agents on trainings, and they want to come out and talk to people.
Sure.
You call them up and they'll say, let's schedule it, and they're not going to charge you anything. It's information that you probably wouldn't get otherwise, and it's really impactful.
So traditional options, and Mark, you kind of hit on some of these, right? Emails, website posts, newsletters, flyers. I don't think anybody would deny that, those are potential options you can take. But in terms of actually getting value, I think you touched on some of the ones that I wanted to point out as potential options here. Leveraging social media, going on podcasts, the community, the town hall events, providing control suggestions or self-audit support, offering periodic audits, free risk assessments. I mentioned way up at the top here that we just launched a NIST risk assessment module of Track, a free version of that. We'd be more than happy to provide that to some of your commercial customers if you're interested in them getting in here and taking a crack and being able to self-assess themselves, gamifying it, finding ways to reward good behavior, things like that. And Lindsay, this is where I'm going to pull you in for the first time, and I apologize for making you sit silently this whole time here. Not a very good host, I apologize. But coming at this from more of a marketing or content perspective, what do you think about these kind of traditional options versus non-traditional options, and maybe other avenues to consider?
Yeah, I think all of these are great options and would be wonderful in a full campaign. And that's kind of what I would recommend, is thinking of security awareness as almost like an internal marketing campaign rather than just a one-off, like we've been saying. And instead of a single email or an annual announcement, you can drip content across the channels that your people are already using. So you can put a video in your weekly meeting or in your newsletter, or a quick tip on Teams every week, an infographic on your LinkedIn. And this will really keep that message top of mind. And like Mark said, those real stories will make that even more powerful. So people will tune out those abstract warnings, but they really remember situations that feel relevant to their day-to-day and humanize those concepts. So I think a combination of the traditional and non-traditional in a campaign that runs year-round, even outside of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I think a big thing to me is talking at your customers and not to them, right? So, don't be overly technical. A lot of them probably won't get a lot of the terminology that you guys are familiar with, because you have to have audits and technology and training and all that stuff. Most people out there don't want to get super technical. They just want to know what's at stake, really. And I think that's the second one. Help them understand what's at stake. I think that's where those examples that both Mark and Lindsay talked about are really critical. Offering easy step-by-step instructions. How can we better protect ourselves? What does that look like? But not just top level, hey, you should do security awareness training, or you should do testing, phishing tests. Talk to them about how they can do that. Meeting them at their level. Not everybody has the same level of knowledge. Mark, you highlighted this, but finding partners to help. Law enforcement's great. I'm sure a lot of people on this call have MSPs that they work with, audit companies. We're obviously happy to provide information. And then again, be that trusted advisor. You have the opportunity to get out in front of this. You have the opportunity, you have the reputation of being good at this and protecting customer data and knowing what you're talking about, use that as an opportunity to get out in front of it and really talk to your customers about how they can better protect themselves going forward. Because at the end of the day, it does wind up protecting you as well. So Lindsay, I apologize. I'm going to turn this back over to you. I know that we wanted to talk about kind of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, some of the core topics they're covering. We are a 2025 champion, not to brag, but we're excited about that. But I'll let you cover these four, and then we'll get into some of the content that we put out there this year already.
Absolutely. So like Brett said, these are the core four concepts that the National Cybersecurity Council is focusing on this year. And as a 2025 champion, we're really on board to help promote these concepts as well. And this year's theme is Stay Safe Online. And it's all about those simple ways that you can protect yourself, your family, your business, and your customers from those online threats. So these core four concepts, using strong passwords, turning on MFA, recognizing and reporting scams, and updating your software are a really great way to kind of frame your Cybersecurity Awareness Month content and put out resources around those topics.
And we'll get to those resources in a second. But Mark, I mean, obviously, from a financial institution perspective or a cybersecurity perspective, these all seem pretty obvious, but obviously these are kind of the low-hanging fruit, right? If we can get this information out to our customers about these different things, they're pretty substantial, maybe make pretty substantial progress on protecting yourself just with some of these simple options, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, there are three main attack vectors that you need to worry about. One's phishing, obviously, we say that over and over again. Number two is simple passwords, right? That's, like you said, low-hanging fruit. They're always going to get the easiest thing. And the third is, I see, update software, right? For those more traditional attacks, that's the number one attack vector is unpatched machines. And again, AI is really good at identifying those. Here's a vulnerability, go find me a machine. So yeah, those are great, all great ideas there.
So Lindsay, I know we've got just about a few minutes left here, but let's talk about some of the different things we've already got available. And again, they're on the slide deck and you can find them on our website. But here are some blog posts, and I know you had a couple you wanted to touch on real quick here.
Yeah, with October coming up really quickly, our team has curated some great resources for you to share to run a month-long campaign without having to start from scratch. So two I want to call out real quick are, what are the best methods to test employee cybersecurity awareness? This is a great starting point for looking for fresh ways to see how your people are absorbing those concepts. Includes phishing, deep fakes, and even dumpster diving. So it helps you figure out which approach you want to take. And then also we have phishing tips for employees. It combines practical tips with like a real life social engineering test that one of our NetSec engineers performed. And it really shows how phishing attacks actually happen and what employees can do to respond and find them. So that really helps make it more memorable. And like Brett mentioned earlier, we have the golden rule of email. And that talks about that mantra that you can share with your team to keep it top of mind. And then
I did dumpster diving one time for this company as for a test for a bank, and I will absolutely never do that again. But here are some other SBS resources as well. And Lindsay, I know you particularly wanted to talk about our security awareness toolkit.
Yes, this toolkit is on our resource library. It has a lot of other great posters, tip sheets, and ebooks that you can check out. But this security awareness toolkit, I wanted to mention specifically, it's really a one-stop shop for all of your needs for this upcoming month. We have webinars, blog links, ebooks, and certifications to help you train your team. Tips on building a cybersecurity culture so it becomes more second nature. Social media posts that you can just take, plug and play, post on your social media, use your own logo if you'd like. They're free to take. We just want to have these resources for you to use and help educate your company and your customers. We even have a cybersecurity playlist on there that our company made with AI as a little contest last year. So it's a fun way to keep it.
Digital rodeo.
Put in
Digital
a plug
rodeo is
for
mine.
yourself there, huh?
Listen to that
Well,
one.
we are at the hour mark or just under. Just a couple of takeaways. The threats your customers are facing are very real. And while some threats have more awareness than others, obviously the notion that I'm not a target is very prevalent still. as AI matures, the threats will likely become more dangerous and maybe increase. Although, again, our glass half full guy here thinks that the positive side of it will catch up in the future, and I certainly hope that's true. You've got an opportunity to be the trusted advisor here, and that does probably mean thinking outside the box and meeting your customers where they are. So not just doing the same old stuff we do every single year. And we are more than happy to help. We've got all kinds of resources that are on the slide deck on our website. Certainly feel free to reach out to any of us. All of our contact information is on here. We'd be happy to have a conversation with you, talk about some of the different options you may have, and maybe even provide some help as well. So I apologize, we did not get to questions, but I promise you I will follow up with each of you individually, anybody that did put a question on there. If you don't mind taking our quick survey at the end here, we do appreciate that. Helps us get better. Certainly really appreciate Mark and Lindsay, you're jumping on here. Very, very helpful, great expertise on both sides here, so we appreciate that. And to everybody that sat through this, hopefully you have a great rest of this month and getting prepped for October for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And hopefully that works out really well for you and your customers. So again, hope everybody enjoyed this today. Really appreciate everybody's time, particularly Mark and Lindsay as well. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.